All right, peace nicks, peaceaholics, peacekeepers. Sitting here with my wife Megan. We just had Thanksgiving, just passed this past week. So I wanted to do a little what we're thankful for kind of thing. So I brought my wife in. Also, today's guest is Frye, and we talk more about music than we do about drugs. Sometimes it's nice to have a little reprieve from the ongoing conversation about the horrible war on drugs. But I was thinking, we just lost
everything
in the hurricane.
No, we still have walls. No. We have a lot to be grateful for.
Oh yeah, we got we got new cars now. We're slowly building back. I don't have a studio. That's why if you notice it's a little noisy here. We're sitting on her father's lanai, or what would you call this? Just the back.
Yeah, it's like a pool cage lanai area.
So we're by the pool. It's really nice out. We're back in Florida.
We got our dogs out here with us, Reggie and Dan.
And that's something to be thankful for. We survived the storm. Our pets survived the storm. And, we got our first steady gig back every Friday at...
Downtown Social House.
Yep, downtown Fort Myers. And also what I was thinking about is, we lost a lot of our, stuff. But it's just stuff. Stuff that can be replaced. But you know what I'm really thankful for is my friends and family, and your friends and family.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because... we're staying at their dad's. There's their dad and their stepmom Tammy, and they're letting us, stay here for as long as needed with our animals. So thanks to them.
Thanks to your sister Kristen.
Big
time.
Yep.
Let us stay in her house in the woods up in North Carolina. It was beautiful. We were hiking every single day and getting our mind off of things. It was very, very psychologically beneficial. Angel and Maria.
In Rhode
Island.
In Rhode Island. And we got to go to Brooklyn. We've always talked about going to New York City together. It was just one night, but we were driving through. We were like, why not go see our friend's band at, what was the name of the bar?
Skinny Dennis.
Skinny Dennis, that is it. Yeah, it was freezing cold for us Floridians. Cold rain.
Well, we had non-refundable Radiohead, well, not Radiohead, but the Smile Tom York tickets for Providence.
Yeah.
And so we just decided we had no place to be in Florida. We had no place to be anywhere, really, except for Providence for this concert. So why not just go?
I know. This has been the year of going to shows. For
yeah,
real. And we were supposed to go. We only missed 2 shows out of all the shows because of the hurricane. So we started the year off with, we went and saw the Beatles, Cirque du Soleil in Vegas. And we saw a comedy show in Vegas. Then we saw Tool. Before we flew to Vegas, we saw Tool in Tampa. And then we ended up seeing Elton John at the same venue in Tampa.
Yep.
A few months later. We saw Brit Floyd, amazing Pink Floyd cover band, in Fort Myers. And we went to Red Rocks and saw Andrew Bird and Iron and Wine.
And Nico, what was
Nico
it?
Case.
Nico Case, yeah.
That was awesome. And then
Father John Misty in Asheville.
Father John Misty in Asheville.
That was my favorite.
Yeah, and so we were supposed to go to the Flaming Lips in New Orleans, but that got the hurricane was hitting the day that we would be flying back, so we did not make that show. We were supposed to go to the War on Drugs concert. It's a band, not affiliated with the War on Drugs. Oh, we got someone doing some sawing out here.
That would be my dad.
And but yeah, so we missed the War on Drugs, we missed the Flaming Lips, but we added Doug Stanhope in Charlotte, and we added her friend's band in Brooklyn. So you know what? Same amount of shows.
Hey.
So we're thankful for everything that we have going on. Thankful for we lost a lot this year, but we're thankful for what we still have, and we're super thankful to our friends and family who have helped us out.
Yeah.
All right. Anything you want to add?
Yeah. You just realize how little everything really matters when you just don't have any of it anymore. I'm so grateful that, thank God, our vinyls all made it, because Aaron made these stands for them that they, containers that were 4 feet above where the water was. So that was good that we could hold on to them.
Yeah.
But everything else, clothes and I don't know, everything just washed away, and it's all right, well, this is just what we have now, and we're just going to be kind of minimalist at this point.
I'm going to cut it off here because we got some loud sawing going on. So we're going to go ahead and jump in. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut it off. It is super loud. So sorry for the annoying sawing sound, but that's what happens when you don't have a studio anymore. But again, super thankful to be alive, thankful to have our pets, thankful to have our friends and our family. So today's guest is Andy Frye. You can check his book out. It's 90 Days in the 90's, and I'm going to let him explain his book. I think it's a really cool concept, and like I say, I can't wait to read it. I usually like to read my books before I have the interviews, but we've been so busy and all over the place that I've Not been doing enough reading. Anyway.
Can I say one more thing?
One more thing.
I'm thankful for you.
Oh, man, she beat me to it. Thankful for you, too. All right, let's dive into this episode with Andy Frye.
Later, people.
America's public enemy number one in the United States is drug abuse.
Drugs are menacing our society.
What are your thoughts on the drug problem?
I had a great time doing drugs.
So tonight, from our family to yours, from our home to yours, thank you for joining us.
This is the Piece on Drugs. Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, how's it going?
Good. How you doing, Andy?
Good.
Thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, good to talk to you.
You too. So, is there any questions you have before we go into this, or anything you want to
No, I figured keep it conversational. Where are you located at?
I am temporarily in Mount Holly, North Carolina. I was in Fort Myers, Florida.
Okay.
And the hurricane got us, kind of wiped us out. So,
yeah,
so I'm up here in North Carolina for a few more days than Rhode Island, and then we're going back to Florida to live in a camper while our house gets rebuilt.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, I've gone to Sanibel pretty much all my life. I think my parents were down there actually probably in August. So who knows what it looks like now? I guess we'll find out. But yeah, well, good luck to you and your family and rebuilding and all that.
Thank you. Yeah, it'll happen. It'll take time. Yeah, we worked in Sanibel, Captiva, and Fort Myers Beach, and so we're out of a job. So basically, the podcast is all I'm doing right now.
Yeah. So you've been to the Bubble Room a number of times, I'm sure.
I've been there only once. I worked. That's a Key Lime Bistro and RC Otters, so right there, right beside it. But yeah, I've only been there once. It's a really cool little spot, though. Yeah,
it was basically cocktails and fried food, pretty much. But when I was a kid, I loved going. I went back as an adult. Probably the first time a couple of years ago. I was like, this isn't as good. I mean, there's a cool spot, but it wasn't as great as I remember. As a kid, it was a special place to go. But now I don't eat chicken fingers and fries. So, it's a little different, I suppose.
Yeah, that's very like Christmas. All the Christmas decorations would be more enjoyable as a child, but I still thought it was cool. I haven't had their food, though. I just went and had a cocktail. So
all right, good enough.
Yeah. So let's talk about your book. I'm actually excited to read this. I just read the brief thing that you sent me. Mm-hmm. Is the book out now?
Yeah, it's been out since June. 90 Days in the 90s took me about 5 years to write, but it was fun along the way. I mean, basically, I'm 50. It's about a woman who's about my age, roughly, and she moves back to Chicago. I live in Chicago, so the book's about Chicago. Moves back to Chicago to take over her uncle's record store after he dies, and she gets nostalgic and kind of gets reacquainted with her love of music, and also some of it becomes a local again. So I remember about the 90s. It was, I was part of the first generation, I guess, that, got internet and emails, and eventually I got a cell phone in the late 90s when it was kind of, the point at which I had to. But I do remember sort of the advent of the internet creating a lot of urban legends. I think it's because, we had email, we had access to information in a different way we did in the 80s. So there's a lot of that's a theme in the book of basically like she hears rumors about this train called the Gray Line that goes back to the past and travels in time, and eventually decides to go back to the 1990s in order to kind of reboot her life and redo some things, and then just gets caught up in the music scene and having a little bit too much fun, and that's sort of the subplot. So yeah, it's been out for a couple of months now, and I'm told by people who like music and like American pop culture that they find the book a good read. And yeah, I just it's kind of like to make an analogy, there are a couple of movies in the 90s that I think stood out in terms of like Pulp Fiction, and Dazed and Confused and Friday, where you're just kind of hanging with and riding along with the main characters, and that's the sort of the look and feel of the movie. Like I've never been a gangster. I don't own a gun. I probably never will. But I kind of felt like I'm hanging out with Jules and Vincent in Pulp Fiction, going along on the rides, to the early morning stakeout and everything that happened at the diner. And I really felt like I was a part of that. So that's the approach I took with the book, to have you kind of hang out with Darby, the record store owner who time travels back in time, and really kind of like hang out with her just like you're one of her buddies. And that's how I think that's the look and feel of the book.
That's really cool. Are there bands from the 90s, or is it fictionalized, or is it like,
Yeah.
I mean, is it fictionalized to like made up bands, or is it actually Nirvana and Smashing Pumpkins and these bands?
Yeah. I mean, all those bands are in it. I did make up, I kind of set a rule in my mind where if the characters are going to see a band and this, the scene is describing that I decided to make up a band because I felt it'd be kind of hard to do play by play of like, a certain show. But at the same time, once Darby is back in the 1990s, she still has access to the time travel train, and she ends up getting her old music critic job back. Just kind of as a junior writer at the city paper. So once she gets comfortable with that, she decides like to go check out some more things. And I'm not going to spoil too much, but she does time travel back a little further to see Nirvana's first show in Chicago. At Metro 33 days after Smells Like Teen Spirit was released in 1991. So it necessitated I had to do a little bit of research, but there's a couple of made up bands, just for the purpose of creating fiction. And one little extra for music fans is that if they read the book, if they're familiar with 90s music, they'll notice that all the chapters are named for a pivotal 90s album or song. So there's little extras in there for the diehard music lovers that hopefully they'll find to their liking.
That's really cool. Yeah, so I grew up in the 90s, but I'm about 10 years younger. So I was like 11 and 12 when this stuff was going on, but I was into it, but not probably as much as, you were at the prime of your listening to music, age. My parents were taking away records from saying you're not allowed to listen to this. Yeah. And I had to, basically whatever rules they had is what I had to listen to. But I mean, I still found them on cassettes and stuff. But you opened up the thing the link you sent me with the question of, what would you do if you could travel back to the 90s?
Yeah.
And I know mine is 100%. I'm a big Blind Melon fan, and I would love to take acid and go to Woodstock 94 and see that show, because Shannon Hoon had been sober, but in the spirit of Woodstock, he took acid in that show, and it was such a really good performance. And I remember him taking the hand drums from the band and giving it to the audience, and then security taking it back, and then him taking it back. So that would be my thing. So what would if you could go back for one event in the 90s, what would you pick?
I don't know. So side note on Blind Melon, I remember. I want to say probably the summer of 90. I think it was the summer 93. It was like I would watch 120 minutes on MTV, and like Blind Melon didn't even I think their album was not released. They didn't even have a video, and they started showing live shows from Seattle. Like, here's kind of the next big band from Seattle called Blind Melon, and Shannon Hoon's, just around walking on stage. And I had a friend who was from New Jersey, who when we got back to school, I was a senior, so I think I was a senior, and so it was probably the fall of 93. Was like, I just saw Blind Melon. They did this show, and he gave me a little foreshadowing. I didn't know much about them other than what I seen on TV. He's like, yeah, you could totally tell the singers hopped up on heroin. I'm kind of like, well, how would you know that? And he's like, well, there's rumors about it. I guess, back then, even though I knew a lot about music, there were some people on the forefront of the indiscretions of rock stars at that time. And maybe that's just the dynamic of the live music scene. But I don't know. There's a couple. So I love British rock. In May of 1990, I was getting ready to graduate high school, so I couldn't have been in this concert, but there's a legendary concert by the Stone Roses that happened in May 27, 1990, that, I'd probably have to time travel back, and I would have to also hop on a plane to England to go see the show in Merseyside, where at the time, the Stone Roses were the biggest band in Britain. There's this thing in British rock that I think has happened. It's kind of fizzled out now, where there was always who's going to be the next Beatles, who's going to be the next biggest rock and roll band of all time from the UK. There's a handful, and there's the Happy Mondays and the Blue Aeroplanes, and then the Stone Roses were kind of going to be that almost sure that they're going to be that, but then they did that first album and they just sort of fought with the record company, didn't do anything for 6 years, and then eventually Oasis came along and probably took up the mantle of what at least the music fans who love British rock and are from the UK wanted, and became huge. But I'd probably love to go back to see that that show, because it was I think in the 90s also restarted the whole music fest thing. Definitely because of Lollapalooza. And subsequent to Lollapalooza, there was like the Vans Warped Tour and the Lilith Fair, which was primarily female kind of folk and folk rock singers. Blues Traveler, as you know, did their whole thing with the Horde Tour. I don't know. I know that was kind of characterized as like the hippie bands. or people who like the Grateful Dead would like these bands like Blues Traveler, Widespread Panic, and Guster, maybe. I can't remember who was on that tour. So all those things popped up, but it had been going on in England for a while. I mean, there's the Glastonbury tour. The Stone Roses was just kind of, it was the one band, but it was an outdoor concert that took on that sort of look and feel, and I think sort of gave the green light to people be like, you can go see a band. It doesn't have to be in a stadium. It doesn't have to be this big production. It can be out in the field, and there's a stage and there's some other things going on. So I'd probably go to that Stone Roses show, or one of the early outdoor shows that were sort of the start of the outdoor music fest thing again, because I think that's a dynamic and a kind of cultural high point in the 90s that we just kind of take for granted now. But it's part of music every day now, I think, especially since we're out of the pandemic, we're seeing it again.
Yeah. This has been the more concerts than I've been to all year, or any year of my life has been this year, because everybody's on tour again. Everything's open back up. So we went and saw all these different shows, and we were supposed to see the Flaming Lips in New Orleans, but the hurricane stopped that from happening. But we're still going to see the Smile, Radiohead's new side project in Providence on Monday. So
okay, great.
Yeah, it was what you said about UK only having one band at a time. I never really thought about that in terms of it could be because of the Beatles being, what's the next Beatles? But I remember Eric Clapton talked about that. He said when Cream's first album blew up in the States, he went home expecting to be, hailed a hero, but Hendrix's Hard Experience came out, and he's like, UK only has an attention span for one band at a time, and his wasn't it.
Yeah, it's weird that Jimi Hendrix had to go over to England to get a record deal, and same with like Chrissie Hynde and the Pretenders. Like, she was kind of the punk scene. If you haven't seen it, watch. It's on. I think it's on Netflix now. There's a FX series called Pistol. It's about the Sex Pistols. There's about 7 episodes. I think I watched the thing in like 2 or 3 nights. I just consumed the whole thing because I love the Sex Pistols, and I love that just kind of music history that really, I guess I hope, like my book and like those movies I mentioned, where you're in the thick of it. You're hanging out with these characters and seeing what they see and experiencing what they're doing. I don't know. I mean, I think that the UK definitely has its tastes. I don't know. I kind of feel like they're sort of they get trends in rock and roll a little quicker than the US does, because they're not as distracted. I mean, they have their pop idol type of boy band stuff, but they kind of separate. They don't get for as much as you might say that they have attention spans for only like one big rock band at a time. Like, I think they're not as, they have a pop music and the whole boy band thing and the singer-songwriter thing with people who don't write their own music and play instruments. Like, they consider that's like a talent show thing on the side. I think that they have their radar up for the next great rock and roll band all the time, maybe because of the Beatles and the Stones just kind of set the tone, 60 years ago. And that's sort of their mindset.
Yeah, I can see that. And I don't like everybody says the Beatles are the first boy band, and I see what they're saying, but it's like, but the Beatles wrote their own songs and they formed themselves a group, and they were playing their instruments, and they were a rock band. They're not a boy band, but they were singing love songs, and they all all the harmonies and stuff. Maybe that's why they say that. But it's like, I would love if a boy band like a Justin Timberlake, one of those guys, would go on a pilgrimage and do psychedelics and end up in India and then come and write a really brilliant album. But it just hasn't happened. The Beatles did that. The Beatles, Sgt. Pepper's came out, just changed the world. And all these new pop artists, they don't have any heart or soul. It's just like they're just up on a production line.
At the same time, like the Cure, you could say they're a rock band and a punk, goth, whatever. Listen to the lyrics. I mean, they sing love songs too, and so does Echo and the Bunnymen, and maybe the Pixies don't, and L7 doesn't, but any of your favorite bands that you would consider rock are going to have some things that have some, maybe they're not as sappy and is not as falsely emotional as something that the Backstreet Boys or One Direction is going to put out. But like, human relationships are a common thing. I think rock, punk. I mean, there's punk bands that talk about relationships in their songs. It doesn't make them the same thing as a boy band. So someone who's saying that about the Beatles, if they were the first boy band, they definitely evolved pretty darn fast. And when they're putting out 2-3 albums a year in 67, 68, 69, and Revolver came out in 66, and they're doing the psychedelic thing in 67, and then putting out the White Album, they're definitely not a boy band. So the good part about music is we can debate it, and the albums are still what they are. They're still great.
Yeah, and so I wanted to ask you about one thing you said. Indie rock, the '90s happened, and indie rock tops the charts. And I always try to figure out why I thought '90s were the best decade in music, because I did think that for a long time growing up, and then I went and got into like Echo and the Bunnymen and some bands from the '80s that I didn't like the '80s, but it's because I didn't like what was popular in the '80s. There's so much good music beneath the surface. But do you think that that's what sets the '90s apart? Is that the underground music became the number, reached the top, or has it always kind of been happening that way?
Yeah, I think it's the approach. So I mean, I didn't like. I think in the '80s, I didn't really like Prince that much because it was always on the radio. Madonna was always on the radio, but they have some great songwriting and pop songs. You can't deny that they're legends. Whereas like The Cure and Echo and the Bunny and the Pixies was kind of like it'd show up on a college station first, and then one or two of their songs. I guess I look at the staying power of some of those. If you had to compare, I don't know. Yeah, I just saw Echo and the Bunnymen here in Chicago about going on a month and a half, 2 months ago, and they're still around. But I don't know, is Glass Tiger still around? They had a chart-topping hit in the '80s. Nope, I don't think so. So, but what I would say about the '90s is, so I graduated high school in 1990. It was kind of a strange time. So, kind of before I get to your answer, like in 1990, yeah, there was still like Debbie Gibson and New Kids on the Block on the radio, but there was also room for The Cure and the Pixies, and like Living Colour was the biggest hard rock band in the world. And these Black guys from the Bronx who went to high school together, they're just straight hard rock with some melodies. And Vernon Reid, their guitar player, is, like Hendrix on steroids in a way. And I think it opened that there was some willingness to have something besides that. But I think that we kind of mark the beginning of the decade musically with Nirvana and Smells Like Teen Spirit and Nevermind the album. I think the difference is it blew up. I think, I read some article a couple months ago about what happened in 1991 in the summer so you got Ugly Kid Joe was kind of like they kind of sounded like a metal band. They're kind of not really hair metal, but kind of taking some of the same notes, putting out their album. And at the others, so there was Nirvana's Nevermind actually came out late August. And the other huge album was the double album by Guns N' Roses, which tells you that rock wasn't going away. But I think the record companies took note and saw that bands that played their own instruments and wrote their own songs, and a lot of times, I think Oasis and Nirvana are pretty good examples of this, where the band has a large role, if not a credit, in the production of the album. It wasn't just like, no disrespect to Def Leppard or Van Halen, but it wasn't like we got away from hiring the big rock producer to produce the album and put it out. Like there was a lot more say from indie bands and indie labels in terms of putting out music that people reacted to well, and they bought these albums in the millions. And then I think there was this. I remember there was this behind the music. I used to watch VH1 Behind the Music, and I found myself watching the one about Poison, and I don't like Poison at all, but Bret Michaels is kind of basically bitching and complaining that, he walks in the record store. I guess it was Elektra. I might have the record label wrong. Walks in one day, in '89, and the most important band of the label was on the wall behind the receptionist when you come up from the elevator. So Poison was behind the receptionist, and then I don't know, maybe like 18 months later, he comes back and the poster is replaced with an Alice in Chains poster, and he kind of complained that told him everything he needed to know about the record label's priority and the type of music that they are promoting. So I think that there was definitely an interest in authenticity, both from record label. The record labels kind of caught on once Nirvana did their thing, and really their album, first major label album, blew up. And they kind of said, all right, that's what we need to do. We need to find rock bands, not pop bands. And at the same time, we kind of hear stories about a band kind of changing their image overnight. They're a rock band, and now they want to be a grunge band. They wish they were from Seattle. I mean, I knew people. I was a freshman in college in '91. I would work my summer job with guys who be like, yeah, I'm going up to Seattle, see if I can get in a band, as if you're like going to go try out for the Seattle Mariners and see if you can play first base. There's this mindset that I need to kind of be in a certain place and do what they do. And maybe the unfortunate side is we got poster grunge. We got Nickelback and Creed, and some bands that were kind of, if not faking it, definitely were derivative.
100%.
But I really think that, sorry to interrupt, but like the thing that you said was the indie, and there's more, the indie band thing happened because there's more of a focus on the artist and what the artist had to say, not what Mr. Veteran producer has to say and how they're going to reshape the music for the market or for, for the industry. There was a focus on the artist more than anything, I think.
Exactly, and that's what I love in music. You take a band like Wilco, who's producing Yankee Foxtrot Hotel, and the label says this isn't what we want from you, and so he goes to a different label and has the most successful album of his career. And I love those kind of stories. But yeah, you see the way that the record industry tries to shape music. A band like Nirvana comes out, and then they immediately say, we got to find more bands like that. And then you get your Bush and your Silverchair and your other bands that I didn't dislike. I'm not saying that necessarily didn't like them, but they were finding out that sound. But then you get your Nickelback and your Seethers that come out that they really are just like packaging these bands to be like the next one, or Puddle of Mud, the bands that I can't stand. And that's what we see the record labels do. They've always done it, right? Arctic Monkeys come out, then you get bands like the Growlers and that kind of sound. They try to find the waves, but the bands that come out with that first original sound, that's the stuff you're looking for. And then when that Nirvana album came out, wasn't there like 4 other albums right in like within a month or two of each other, like 10?
So 10 came out. I remember I was in spring. So I was a freshman in college. I went to New Orleans with a friend of mine for spring break, I think because he lived there. His parents lived there. I remember going through a record store. It was like cutting edge. And I'm at a record store. Like I put the headphones on. There's like this little tiny screen where I could see the video for Alive, where, Eddie Vedder's riding the crowd. He's crowd surfing. And like, oh, I don't know who this band is, but they sound pretty cool. But I remember that. And then, fast forward to the fall, they're one of the biggest bands in the world. So it was, Nirvana, Nevermind came out, Bad Motorfinger by Soundgarden, who had been in Seattle forever. I mean, they've been putting out albums since 85 or 86. Alice in Chains had a kind of a hard rock album called Facelift, who came out before, which it wasn't on my radar, but kind of resurfaced. I knew the Screaming Trees from my freshman year as a college DJ. They had an album which I actually cite in my book called Uncle Anesthesia, which was actually co-produced by Chris Cornell. When nobody knew who the hell Chris Cornell was or the Screaming Trees. And then, 10, obviously the huge album by Pearl Jam, I think. I don't know, maybe it was a switch from, Bret Michaels in his spandex with his, teased hair and high-pitched vocals to like that more masculine sound that came out of the vocal cords of Eddie Vedder and also Nirvana, Kurt Cobain and Chris Cornell. And I don't know, maybe it was just kind of like, wow, this whole thing sounds good. Let's switch to that. But there was also like alternative music was around, and maybe we were labeled it as college rock, but I would go to a show and, there'd be a full house in a theater, maybe not a stadium, but a theater to see Ned's Atomic Dustbin or Fishbone, or there's just an undercurrent and interest from, kids in the suburbs who had had pop radio stuffed down their throat. I didn't really come from, I think that the kids today who are in high school now, and I've got a high school student in my household, they're more into guitars than I guess my generation was. They're a little bit more active. And the good news is that I got asked about this on a podcast last night. If you're talking to a kid, boy or girl who's picking up a guitar in 2022, they're not trying to learn songs by Foster the People or 21 Pilots. They're trying to figure out how to play Hendrix and Led Zeppelin and, kind of the standard, maybe some AC/DC, maybe some Television, depending on whether they trend metal or indie rock or alternative. That it's, the kind of the standards are still there, and there's still a respect paid to rock and roll. Nobody's trying to play like the new album by Cannons on their guitar. If they're a guitar player, they're, my kid doesn't like Dylan, so he's not really into folk, but I hear him try to play Marquee Moon by Television, before dinner. So I think that's a good thing. And there also are a crop of rock bands that are kind of in the indie rock footprint, like Wet Leg right now is starting to blow up. They have these 2 women, I think they're probably in their late 20s, from the Isle of Wight in England. They're coming to Chicago and playing tours in the US because people just recognize their album is good and their lyrics are clever, and they drop some F-bombs and they kind of just do what they do. And they sound maybe a little bit like the Breeders, but I think that, their songwriting is a lot more complex without being, too complex. And then there's bands like Mama, which sound like Veruca Salt and a lot of the 90s bands, and another band that's big in the UK right now called Dry Cleaning, which they're kind of, art rock and alternative, and they've kind of a nod to David Bowie and some of the clever rock of the 70s. And those are kind of the three that are really, taking off right now. We'll see if there's, one of them. I don't know. I mean, it kind of comes down to like, does one of them have a number one album, number one single, and is that the tipping point to kind of change things back to rock and roll? I don't know what the answer to that is, but rock and roll isn't dead. There's people who still play guitars and want to learn the old stuff because that's what they know to be the best.
Yeah, for sure. And to your point about the kids learning the younger stuff, I have a bandmate that teaches guitar, and he said exactly what he said. He said, all these kids I'm teaching, is like, they're not wanting to learn anything that I don't know. Like, it's all stuff that I grew up with, and I grew up learning. That's what they want to hear. And he's like, he thinks music could take a corner. And
yeah, music's cyclical, I think, too.
Yeah, for sure. So I wanted to bring this conversation a little bit to the piece on drugs.
Yeah.
One thing that happened in the 90s was with grunge music was the heroin use, and we saw some Kurt Cobain's death. And I read Heavier Than Heaven. I'm sure you read that.
Actually, I have not, but go on.
It's really dark. I mean, it gets into Kurt. It starts about his childhood, sets it up, and then it gets into his addiction, and you feel like you're right there with him. And it's like, the amount of heroin he was doing was crazy. And that's why when people say, well, there's no way he did it because he had enough heroin in the system to kill a horse or whatever, it's like, yeah, but he had a tolerance to handle that much heroin. That's just the facts. But I just wonder, I read something, someone was just kind of, I don't know if they were just pontificating or whatever but they had a theory that the reason grunge died was because when Kurt Cobain shot himself, it set the bar too high for, if you want to be authentic, it takes the authenticity away from people's depression and their music. When Kurt Cobain was, and I just wonder if that happened in the 90s, or because the 90s to me were amazing, and then they really fizzled and turned into pretty, most of the music was horrible. That was popular. Now I'm still saying I still love Neutral Milk's album. There was a OK Computer. I mean, there's still great albums in the 90s, but the ones that were on the radio were just awful towards the end.
I don't know. I think so. I addressed this. There's a part in my book where Darby, so she's back in the 90s, which is kind of the plot of my book. And like she accidentally gets her job as a music critic, like a low-level music critic at the city paperback, and she kind of reports to the office the first day. And she's kind of thinking about things that people have said, like what you're saying about the kind of the death of rock and roll. And it takes place in 1996, and in the fall of 96, and she's I think if I remember right, she's kind of reflecting on just what the stuff that happened in 1996. Like Tupac Shakur just got murdered. A couple of bands broke up, and there's this sort of I think it's just a progression towards it, music changes. I want to say that Soundgarden probably broke up in 97. The Smashing Pumpkins had, on tour, their keyboard player overdosed on heroin, and the drummer who survived it, they kind of had this shit show of an episode in climactic and anticlimactic fashion in the middle of a big tour. And I think it was 1997, maybe it was 96. I'm forgetting right now.
It was the Melancholy tour, as I remember.
Yeah, so maybe it was 96. So you couldn't have scripted it any better or worse way. It just highlighted the problems that they're out there. But I think I don't think that, because Kurt Cobain, he actually died on my birthday in 1994. April 5th is my birthday, and actually Lane Staley died in April 5th in 2002. I don't know. I think it kept trucking along there, and maybe I'd counter it by saying that in 1996, when they released, posthumous to Kurt Cobain, there was an album called From the Muddy Banks of the Wishkah, which was some outtakes and I think a live track or two, and not like new material, and that went number one. It was kind of like a compilation of the extra stuff. And it went number one as an album, which you wouldn't guess that. I don't know. I mean, you wouldn't have guessed that was. You would think that Nirvana's done because the singer's gone. But we didn't hear anything about Sublime until Bradley Nowell was dead, pretty much.
Yeah.
So, and they're, it's weird that Sublime, you could argue that they're one of the biggest bands of the '90s, but unless you lived in Long Beach or California and you got to see them early when Nowell was still alive, like nobody can say like, oh yeah, I saw that big Sublime tour in 96 or 97, because he was gone then. So I don't know. I think it ran its course, but it had good music, had a heyday for a while, and then eventually, it's weird because like Jive Records, which I first knew for distributing some of the Tribe Called Quest albums, those great first couple albums, made a business decision, and they started putting out all these boy bands from Orlando, and they're kind of all the same to me. I mean, Backstreet Boys and NSYNC, and I don't know why you need a 98 Degrees in O-Town. Like, how many bands from Orlando that don't write their own songs and don't play instruments do you really need? But it was filling a market. There was a market segment that was being filled, and obviously there was enough teens or teenage girls from the suburbs who wanted some pretty young men to sing them love songs and dance in step wearing the same outfits. And but then Blink 182 came out and made fun of them with their videos. So I mean, there's something for everything. It's just a matter of those artists that are out there, how well they execute. And there are some great bands that were really excellent that I think didn't have great administrative and business skills. Like, there's a band called the Connells. They're from North Carolina, actually. Very radio friendly sound, in the same vein as REM, but they never really hit it big, I think, because they were sort of on the college scene and they weren't really grunge and alternative enough, and maybe a little too pop to kind of break into what was prominent in the mid 90s. And then I think their bass player's wife had a bout with cancer that kind of sidelined them. So that happens sometimes. It doesn't make them any worse of a band. I mean, they're a great, kind of alternative pop band. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess it would take a historian. We all have our own opinions about this, but I wouldn't say that the day Kurt Cobain dies is when the good music died, because I think we had several years after that a lot of really great things happened, and not just in rock, but rap changed, and we go on for days talking about this, that there was a lot of good stuff that came after that for a number of years.
Yeah, and I have a friend, another bandmate, that said, like, in his opinion, it was grunge that died, not rock and roll. But his opinion is, he says Nirvana is not grunge. Nirvana created the sound that became grunge, which was all the crap after. But Kurt Cobain was just a pop artist, and that's what he called himself, is punk pop. And
yeah, I don't know if grunge is really a genre, because I mean, if it is a genre, then it's pretty much just a handful of bands that maybe weren't even that alike. Like, it'd be, obviously the ones from Seattle, but when you say grunge, I think Nirvana, Alice in Chains, Soundgarden, Pearl Jam, L7, and some of these bands that some people never heard of that we've forgotten about, like Taj and Mother Love Bone and so on. And then I think post grunge is sort of like a corporate version of that. It's like kind of like the light soda version of grunge. I think maybe we limit what the artist really brought to the table if we call them grunge. Obviously, you say grunge and you know what we're talking about, but I feel like it's almost like a subgenre of a subgenre. Because then you could say, well, this band isn't rock, it's alternative. What does that mean? It's I don't know, labels maybe don't necessarily mean as much as we think they do.
Yeah, when I think grunge, the first band I think of is I don't remember the name of the band. They're a pretty good band, actually, but they were the one that was playing live on the streets in the movie The Crow, the first movie. And I just think of that movie and that kind of just rainy, dreary Seattle, and I think heroin. I think like kind of an angst. But a lot of this comes from, I guess I would say, it started in the 80s with globalization and the job market going away, and it kind of destroyed a lot of families, and divorces happened through finances, and those kids came up in the 90s, and that's the music they were wanting to hear because they could relate to it, and that's what the music that was being made.
Yeah, but then again, Stone Temple Pilots, some people say they're grunge, and they're from Santa Barbara. Mm-hmm. Santa Barbara's not really, I wouldn't say it's a terribly depressing place if you ever go down there. So who knows? I think it's all about what the artists produce and how people react to it. But
it's true. But I mean, the sound, the music that Stone Temple Pilots were making, it sounds like it should be coming from Seattle. A lot of it, not all of it, but like you think of like Creep, Half the Man I Used to Be, or, those kind of songs that they're fitting that kind of depression. So also I was thinking about the 60s versus the 90s, and so you have the 60s, psychedelics or the drugs, everybody's taking psychedelics, peace and love is the atmosphere, and it kind of all culminates with Woodstock 1969, peace, love, and happiness. And there was just that documentary on Netflix about Woodstock 99. And I have friends with different opinions on this. I have a friend that went and said, well, that was a very biased documentary. He said, I went and I had a great experience. It was definitely run horribly by the promoters, but the people there were for most of them were very, they were about peace and love, most of them till the end. But I don't know. When I watched the documentary, I go, I think it's a sad way for the 90s to end when it kind of culminates with, destruction and burning it down versus peace, love, and happiness. And the drugs were different in the 90s. There was a lot of, what was your opinion about Woodstock 99?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I feel like Woodstock 99 was just like post grunge was kind of a commoditized version. It's kind of like, all right, so I only went to CBGB once in my life before it closed. If I'm in the Newark, New Jersey airport where there's a CBGB cafe, I'm not freaking buying. I'm not going there. I'm not gonna. It's maybe just me being a Gen Xer. I'm not gonna, pay $25 for a hamburger and fries and say I was at CBGB. It's not the same friggin' thing. So I feel like Woodstock 99 was that in the version of it's kind of like taking the whole beautiful thing of a music fest and commoditizing it, putting Limp Bizkit on the tour, and then you're charging $20 for a bottle of water when there's no water to go around and it's 100 degrees and people are crowded. People are going to get pissed off. What do you think is going to happen? I'm not endorsing violence, but it was a corporate event that it exemplifies the worst in corporate event management. It has nothing really to do with the music or the fans necessarily. So Lollapalooza runs in Chicago every summer. If you go down Lakeshore Drive, you will see there's 2 or 3 layers of barriers on Lakeshore Drive so that nobody who is a tourist who's not paying attention or a drunk idiot is going to wander out on Lakeshore Drive and get hit by a car, because that's what would happen if there weren't those 3. So Chicago does a really great job of managing that event and making it as safe as possible and also enjoyable as possible. And, you sort of pay for the privilege. Obviously, it's a couple, I don't know, maybe $150 to go for a full day. But, Metallica headline one of the nights. So it's not some BS list of bands, that you definitely pay for, get what you pay for in terms of the music and the safety and all the things that go with it. And I think Woodstock 99 was just kind of a bunch of, it wasn't quite as bad as Firefest, I'll say that, but it definitely wasn't a pinnacle. It shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame of corporate event management, that's for sure. So yeah, your friend's probably right. But documentaries obviously take a position and they, spend an hour and a half, sort of arguing that position.
Well, they wanted to blame male, masculine toxicity, bands like Limp Bizkit, how angry they were. And they were, but like they said, like Rage Against the Machine played and there wasn't any problems with their set. And so it was once the water bottle stopped happening and once like people were hot, they were sleeping, all the problems you named. So my buddy was saying, yeah, if it had been run with those same people and same bands, but run the way that it was run in 94 or 69, there wouldn't have been any problems.
Yeah, and I mean, 69 was. I mean, I don't think it was planned, and
it's true.
About 69, it wasn't. They didn't expect that many people to show up, and maybe it was a different look and feel at the time, and people just kind of cooperate. I remember there was it was Wavy Gravy. I think it was way before I was born, but so he starts the show. I think on the Saturday of Woodstock 69, is like, okay, we're having a breakfast in bed for 400,000, and I think throughout the day they're like, okay, it's a little crowded, it's a little hot. Be cool to people, be kind, we're all here for the same reason. Whereas it's different than, Fred Durst with his hat backwards going to be like, oh, let's break shit or, whatever the hell he said. I'm not, he's a musician and obviously wants to make a living making music. And there's something beyond, that obviously I don't like their music. Nothing disrespectful to them about wanting to make a living, make music, but they're not Fugazi, they're not Led Zeppelin, they're not Janis Joplin. There's definitely a quality issue there comparing Limp Bizkit to some of the other bands that we could see.
I completely agree. I'm from Fred Durst's hometown. He was a generation above me, but
where's he? I don't even know where they're from. Where are they from?
He's from Gastonia, North Carolina, but he claims Jacksonville. That's all you'll never hear him say, because that's where his band's from. But he grew up here. My bandmate's older brother was a DJ for our local radio station, Power 98, and they were like best friends. He called him to ask him if he wanted to join his band. He's like, "Nah, I've got this gig at Power 98," and then their band blew up, and But I don't see how they blew up so big. It was just, Maynard from Tool, he talked about those bands and said, well, when people he always gets on a high horse with his music, of course, but he goes, when we're not making music and my peers aren't making music, well, they're going to fill that void with bands like Limp Bizkit and Korn. And I thought it was kind of funny. And also, I think it's kind of true. I love Tool. I've always been a fan.
I mean, I don't think Korn is not really my kind of music, but I feel like they're a little bit more authentic than Limp Bizkit. They obviously, some people think they really suck, but I don't think that they're the same thing. And I'm not going to say that. I don't know. I don't know. I think Korn, for as much as I might not be into their music, I think that there's a little bit more intention to make their kind of music versus, hey, I'm making this rock video because I want to be a rock star. I don't know.
Well, I was a huge Korn fan when I was young, but I mean, I was like 13 and I related to the angst and the anger, and I really liked it. But now when I listen to it, I'm like, I don't even know how I like this. Like, I don't like it at all. But it has served a purpose for me when I was young, going through things.
You made it out alive, so that's good.
Yeah, for sure. So, another person I want to bring up before I let you go is you're a sports and pop culture writer and you've written for the Rolling Stones. So this makes me think of Hunter S. Thompson because he's one of my favorite writers and he was a sports writer, wrote for Rolling Stone. Are you a fan of Hunter S. Thompson?
A little bit, kind of more. I mean, I think I never met the guy or knew him. I mean, I think he did get a little bit of a big head. Like he went from hand to mouth, Bailey being supposedly the story on him is when he first started writing professionally, like he'd hunt a deer and that's what him and his wife would eat for a month, and then he gets to that to sort of, I don't know, kind of wanting to be a bad guy. He's definitely a colorful character. He ran for mayor of like Telluride or
Sheriff Aspen.
Yeah, something like that. Like, so Aspen, yeah, he definitely had, I don't know, like that style of writing. I think what I do respect about him and other writers, kind of constitute new journalism, whether we're talking about Truman Capote or Gay Talese, they kind of they formed the whole nonfiction novel. Like they decided that, writing things that are real doesn't have to be boring and, read like a newspaper column that you can, document. Or Tom Wolfe's a great example. Like one of my favorite movies from the 80s, 3-hour movie is the Right Stuff, where Tom Wolfe was writing, I think, for Rolling Stone. And, he was given the task to go find out why these guys want to go to space so bad. Like why would they risk their lives to sit in a capsule for, 36 hours, not being able to take a bathroom break, not being able to eat, to do this thing? Is it about the glory or is there something else? So he started writing these articles, kind of maybe a little more buttoned up style than Hunter S. Thompson had, but kind of essentially took the same approach, like interviewing these people, getting kind of riding along with them and getting a sense of what makes them tick and what motivates them. And, all the first 9 astronauts were, clean cut, short haired military guys, but that doesn't answer all the questions about why they're doing what they're doing and what the space program meant when it first came out. So, The Right Stuff, when it came out as a book, it was essentially a nonfiction novel where we're getting to learn about these 9 quirky characters in a narrative storytelling type of voice that makes it a lot more interesting. You get to know the characters and kind of know, I don't know. So Hunter S. Thompson was great at that. I mean, he kind of did the travel across America, get into crazy situations type of thing. So I think all of the writers of my generation who are maybe like 45 or 50 or 52 now, we definitely take a note from that. So in 90 Days in the 90s, I do associate with a thing that happened in the 90s where, like, if you graduated college in the mid 90s, as soon as you save up a couple of bucks, you're going to Amsterdam or Paris, or Southeast Asia. You're traveling around the world because you know that there's something there beyond the suburb and the strip malls that you grew up, or and I grew up in southeastern Pennsylvania outside Philly, but those kind of suburbs exist in Phoenix and Milwaukee and St. Louis and so on. That kind of took it. We took a little bit of pro tips from Hunter S. Thompson and some of the writers into the adventure that you can have when you just go out and check out the world. So I definitely think he was important for that. I'm not sure I could hang with that guy, like drinking and smoking weed and shooting guns. It's kind of not really my thing, but yeah, he's definitely a titan in literature and as a pop culture icon. I know that he gets a couple mentions in my book, and maybe without even thinking about it, I took a little influence from him about letting my characters do some of the things that writers and just people in the 20th century do.
Yeah, I like that. Like my thing about like his Gonzo style journalism is like he goes into the story and becomes part of the story and actually manipulates the story, changes things because he's doing things within the story. Whereas Tom Wolfe, are we talking about the same Tom Wolfe, the one that wrote Electric Acid Kool-Aid Test?
No, that was you think is that
I thought it was Tom Wolfe.
Ken Kesey.
It was about Ken Kesey, but it was. Let me look it up real fast.
Tom Wolfe wrote Vanity Fair, and he wrote The Right Stuff. Right.
It says Tom Wolfe, but I think there's two Tom Wolfes because some.
There's Tom Wolfe and Thomas Wolfe, who was the writer in the 19th century. But maybe I'm just.
Yeah, Tom Wolfe. Tom Wolfe wrote the Electric Acid Kool-Aid Test.
Okay. Kesey wrote one for the Cuckoo.
Yeah, and then
I haven't had enough coffee. I haven't had enough coffee today to kind of talk about this.
No, Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test was about Ken Kesey. He followed him and the Merry Pranksters around on the bus, and yeah, but he's a really good writer. But Hunter S. Thompson criticized him, saying, "Well, he didn't have the balls to get into the story." But then he said, "But he still somehow made an amazing book." I'm like, "Yeah, because he didn't need to be in the story to make an amazing book."
Yeah, they're all cut from the same cloth. Tom Wolfe wore a buttoned-up white suit and a white tie, and he's definitely more of a traditional journalist, but he broke out of that anyway. I'm sure that if we talk to Kerouac, he could probably say to Hunter S. Thompson, "You don't know the half of it. I don't know, you didn't do half the shit that I did." He probably would say to him. But to each their own, and the point is that they all did something groundbreaking with storytelling. And I guess with Hunter S. Thompson, his thing was like, there's no way you can tell a story and be neutral. I think was one of his.
Mm-hmm.
That you're going to be biased anyway, so you might as well get in and participate. I think Ken Kesey probably did a little bit of that, and Tom Wolfe did a little bit of that, and Kerouac obviously did it, half a generation before. And I don't know. I guess one of my complaints about writers who have bestsellers now is that they don't do enough of that. I mean, I'm glad Matt Haig is a bestseller, but if, I think there's kind of the subset of readers that just want to read books about people who are going on for a couple hundred pages about how stifling depression is. I'm not trying to minimize depression, but if I pick up a book, I kind of want to experience something with the characters. I don't want to just sit there and listen to somebody moaning about being sad or what they couldn't do in life. And in the 90s, I kind of lampooned this book. There's a writer called David Foster Wallace who wrote a 1100-page book,
Infinite Jest.
Yes, I feel like it was like the Radiohead wannabe book on steroids. It was like, oh, here's a book for people who need to feel intellectual because they read a 1100-page book that has footnotes on every page, and the plot never really gets resolved, and all this, I felt like this book is not about enjoying the characters or enjoying the book or revealing anything about who they are. Then there are a bunch of people who are depressed and pissed off that they're depressed and pissed off, and a bunch of people are mean to each other, and that's the end of the story. If that's what the 90s was about, then I guess I missed that, because Kurt Cobain shot himself. Obviously, he was in a bad place at the end of his life. And there's other artists, that's maybe part of being an artist, is that, some make it, some don't. But I didn't think the 90s sucked as much as David Foster Wallace might have, implied in his book. And I don't really see why people think he's so brilliant.
Yeah, I tried to read it. Somebody told me I had to read it. So I got almost 400 pages in, and I was like, this book nothing is happening. It's the most boring thing I've ever read in my life. So I stopped reading it. And
were you pissed off about the time you spent reading it? Because I know some people were, like, why the hell did I spend 2 months reading this stuff? I don't know. Maybe there's something in there that I didn't get, but it's kind of the opposite of Hunter S. Thompson. It's the opposite of Tom Wolfe. There's participation in the story by that author, but I feel like if I'm going to participate in the story, I'm going to go into a scene and be one of the characters, like in a Woody Allen movie. I don't want to be hanging out with these boring, depressed, angry people, playing at a tennis academy. That's just my take. I think the 90s was much more than that.
I definitely agree with that. Yeah, there was a lot going on in the 90s, and a lot of it was fun. I mean, I had a great time in the 90s. When I say the music was kind of depressing, it doesn't mean it left you depressed. It still had oomph. It had that, power in it. And I'm like Rage Against the Machine. Yeah, it's angry, but it's also got me moving. I mean, when I go to the gym, I listen to Rage Against the Machine. It's I love the 90s. Honestly, that's my generation.
The 90s music made us think. So I mean, the good part about the 90s music is it did make us kind of think what do we think about this versus some of the pop on the radio in the 80s. Some of it did that, a lot of it didn't. So I think that was, to kind of get back to your earlier question, that was part of the shift too, and that music actually meant something more than tapping your foot and just singing baby, baby, baby. There's a lot more to what music had to offer in the 90s. For the average artist that maybe didn't make it as big as a Prince or Madonna or Nirvana or Pearl Jam, that their voices they're given a voice to speak a little bit more artistically than, the average kind of artist in the 80s. That's just my take.
Yeah. So I'm going to, won't keep you much longer, but before I go, I'm going to ask you, go ahead and plug your book, or tell my people where they can find your book. Yeah,
90 Days in the 90s. You can go to 90daysinthe90s.com if you want to. If you go there and order it there, I'll sign you a copy, send you some swag. Or it's obviously on Amazon and any other place you buy books. I would say if you have a local I keep saying record store because there are some record stores in Chicago that carry my book because I've approached them. But small record stores or bookstores. If you feel like you want to support the little local store, obviously they can order it for you. It might take a week. But Amazon, if you're online all day, Amazon, you can point and click and buy a copy or two. I will say if you got music friends and music nut family members, the holidays are coming up. If my book isn't your bag, definitely keep in mind your crazy uncle who's in a Pearl Jam tribute band might like this book, and it's available anywhere you buy books, I guess.
Right on, man. Well, thanks for joining me. Thanks for being on here. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
No problem. And I'll really enjoy it and looking forward to reading your book. I'm definitely going to order it.
Good deal.
Awesome. I'll talk to you later. Peace out. All right, peace, Nicks. Thanks again for listening. Once again, happy Thanksgiving. Hope everybody has a wonderful time with their families. And thanks for listening so much. Thanks for supporting. And again, 5 stars on Apple will help us out. Follow us on Instagram, Twitter. Go to www.thepeaceonjokes.com/subscribe to subscribe to our newsletter. And peace out.